The loudest shift in a relationship is not when someone leaves, but when they stop speaking. You don't notice it at first. It's subtle, a delayed reply, a change in tone, a silence that stretches longer than usual. But slowly, it eats away at your certainty. The heart begins to whisper questions the mind cannot answer. Did I do something wrong? Is he losing interest? Should I reach out again? This is the moment of testing, not of him, of you. The silence he gives you is not a wall, it's a mirror. And most people panic at their reflection. But you, if you are ready, will breathe, because this moment, this quiet withdrawal, is not where you lose love. It is where you find yourself. And only when you find yourself can true love find you again. When a man begins to distance himself from you, it often feels like an emotional vacuum. You may sense it before you fully register it. A missed call, a shift in the way he looks at you, fewer shared moments, more silence between the words. This change does not shout, it whispers. But the weight of that whisper can be heavier than any loud argument. The mind races to find meaning, to fix, to fill the space with explanations. And yet, within that space lies a rare opportunity, not for control, but for clarity. Energy does not disappear, it shifts. And when it shifts away from you, it's not always an act of cruelty. Sometimes it's a sign of reflection. People, whether they are aware of it or not, respond to energy more than they do to words. The emotional gravity you carry, the weight of your presence, your expectations, your attachments, can subtly push or pull another person without any visible action. Just like gravity, it is unseen but deeply felt. In relationships, especially romantic ones, this invisible force plays out in the smallest interactions. A woman may believe she's giving from a place of love, offering time, attention and affection. But if beneath that giving is a quiet hunger, a need to be reassured, to be validated, to be constantly seen, that energy changes form. It begins to feel less like warmth and more like pressure. And pressure, no matter how lovingly packaged, pushes people away. Imagine a man standing in the middle of a peaceful garden. The air is still and everything around him is quiet and open. But suddenly, the wind picks up, not violently, but persistently. It pulls at his clothes, tugs at his skin, whispers messages into his ears. The wind says, "Do you still love me? Are we okay? Why are you quiet?" It isn't anger, it's anxiety. And so he takes a step back, not because he doesn't care, but because he cannot breathe. This is the nature of emotional gravity. When it becomes too heavy, people seek air. From a neuroscience perspective, this reaction is rooted in survival. The human brain is designed to avoid threat and seek balance. When emotional interactions become loaded with unspoken pressure, the amygdala, our brain's threat detection center, starts firing. It doesn't matter if the pressure comes with a smile. The body knows when the energy around it is too much. The more frequently this tension arises, the more likely someone is to withdraw, not as a punishment, but as a self-protection mechanism. But here lies the deeper truth. If a man distances himself, it is not always because you did something wrong. It is often because something within him does not feel free. And if you rush in to fix it, to explain, to argue, to soothe, to demand clarity, you might reinforce the very thing that made him retreat. He did not leave because of you. He left to find himself. And ironically, it is your ability to hold your center in that moment that determines whether he feels safe enough to return. There is an old parable of a woman who loved a bird. Every day, the bird would fly to her window and sing the most beautiful songs. She adored the bird's presence and cherished their time together. But one day, the bird came less often, sang less loudly. Fearing she would lose the bird forever, the woman caught it and kept it in a golden cage. She fed it well and talked to it often, but the bird stopped singing, and eventually it withered. What she loved was not just the bird, but its freedom, its aliveness. And in trying to keep it close, she killed what made it beautiful. So what is the alternative? Stillness. Stillness is not passivity, it is presence without pressure. It is a state of being where you do not chase answers, nor do you run from discomfort. When a man distances himself, the most powerful response is not to pull him back, but to remain still enough to feel your own energy. Not to act, but to observe. Not to chase his attention, but to examine the weight you're unconsciously asking him to carry. In Eastern philosophy, this stillness is the essence of mastery. The one who moves least often influences the most. The tree rooted deeply in the earth is not shaken by a passing storm. And when it does sway, it does so with grace, not fear. From a physiological standpoint, stillness activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the part of us responsible for rest, digestion, healing, and peace. When you choose to be still, especially in moments of emotional turbulence, you teach your body not to be ruled by the fight or flight response. You interrupt the cycle of emotional reactivity and instead create space for awareness. In that space, your thoughts settle, your breath deepens, your clarity sharpens. And clarity in relationships is magnetic. A woman who does not panic when a man grows distant, who does not beg, blame, or chase. She becomes a mirror instead of a magnet. She reflects his actions back to him without distortion. She does not lower herself to keep him close, nor does she raise her voice to be heard. She lets her silence speak, and it says, I see you, but I also see me. I feel you pulling away, but I will not follow into confusion. I stand here, whole, aware, grounded. Stillness also teaches you to listen more deeply, not just to words, but to energy. What is unsaid often reveals more than what is spoken. If you can sit in the quiet long enough, you begin to feel the truth of the situation, not the narrative your fear wants to tell you, but the deeper current beneath it. You might sense, for example, that his silence is not about you at all. It's about his past wounds. Or you might realize that the connection was never balanced to begin with, and his absence is merely exposing what was always missing. There was once a woman who, after a long period of silence from her partner, chose to do something unexpected. Instead of writing long messages or asking for closure, she took a walk every evening by herself. No music, no phone, just her breath and the rhythm of her steps. At first, her mind raced with questions, but gradually, as the days passed, she began to feel something new herself. She remembered how much she enjoyed the sound of leaves beneath her feet. She remembered the dreams she had put aside. She remembered how peaceful it felt to simply be. And when, weeks later, the man reached out again, she no longer needed him to explain. She had found her answer in the quiet. She was enough. This is the paradox. The less you do, the more you receive, not from others, but from within. Your stillness becomes your strength. It sends a signal, not one of neediness, but of presence. You no longer orbit around someone else's emotional availability. You create your own center of gravity. And from that center, everything changes. Stillness is not silent resignation. It is conscious awareness. It is the courage to sit in the unknown without rushing to resolve it. It is the wisdom to let time reveal what anxiety tries to force. A man who distances himself may not even know why he's doing it. But when he does, and he looks back, what he remembers is not whether you fought for him or cried for him. He remembers whether you stood with dignity, whether your energy stayed calm, whether your stillness gave him space to remember your worth. And even if he never returns, your stillness will give you something far more important, a deeper relationship with yourself. Because every moment you choose not to chase, not to collapse, not to react, you grow. you build the muscles of self-possession. You learn to sit with longing without becoming it. You learn to feel discomfort without trying to escape it. You learn to trust the intelligence of life, rather than trying to control its unfolding. There is a quiet kind of power in a woman who does not run after love, but allows love to meet her where she stands. She becomes the embodiment of emotional gravity. Not the heavy kind that pulls out of need, but the graceful kind that draws others in because she carries the rarest energy of all peace. In a world that teaches you to always do something, choosing stillness is an act of rebellion. In relationships that condition you to prove your worth, choosing stillness is an act of self-respect. And when a man ignores you, when he grows distant, when the silence grows louder than the words, do not rush to fill it. Listen, breathe, stand still. That is where the truth lies. Respect is never something that can be forced into existence through effort, words, or proximity. It cannot be extracted through sacrifice, nor can it be begged into being. Respect must arise naturally, like a reflection in still water. It only appears clearly when you yourself are calm, composed, and unshaken. In relationships, particularly when a man begins to ignore you or create distance, the most dangerous impulse is to try and prove your worth, to overextend, to overgive, to overexplain. But the more you do, the less he sees. Not because you are not valuable, but because true value is not revealed under pressure. It is witnessed in peace. When someone begins to pull away, many people react with panic. It feels like rejection. It feels like abandonment. But beneath that reaction often lies a deeper issue. Not his actions, but your internal orientation. When your self-worth is externally anchored, defined by how much attention you receive, how often someone calls, how frequently someone validates you, you become a prisoner to circumstance. And the moment that attention is withdrawn, your sense of value feels threatened. The temptation then is to force clarity, to seek answers, to chase reassurance. But this effort, though deeply human, often leads to the opposite of what is desired. The more you try to hold on, the more the other person slips away. Why? Because pressure is not connection. When you try to force someone to respect you, you bypass the very thing that inspires respect in the first place, self-respect. There is a quiet wisdom in recognizing that sometimes the most powerful act is not in pursuit, but in pause. There's a short story of a woman who, upon noticing her partner becoming distant, decided not to confront him with emotional demands. Instead, she focused entirely on herself for 30 days. She wrote letters she never sent. She read books that had been sitting on her shelf for years. She walked by the ocean each morning, letting the waves teach her about release. During that time, she said nothing dramatic, issued no ultimatums. And within those 30 days, something remarkable happened. Not only did the man begin to re-engage, but more importantly, she began to see herself clearly. She realized that she had been shrinking to accommodate the relationship, that she had confused attention with affection and sacrifice with connection. When the silence came, it did not destroy her, it revealed her. Respect, in essence, is the natural response to someone who values themselves deeply. And valuing yourself is not just a belief, it is a way of being. It is seen in your posture, your tone, your boundaries, and most importantly, your ability to walk away from what diminishes you. You cannot command respect from someone whose presence costs you your peace. You cannot demand respect in words when your actions show tolerance for being treated as an option. In psychology, this is connected to the concept of boundaries. Boundaries are not about controlling others, they are about honoring yourself. When a man ignores you, the impulse might be to lower your standards, to accept crumbs, to make excuses for his behavior. But each time you do this, you send a message, not to him, but to yourself. And the message is, this is what I believe I'm worth. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, your own self-image begins to erode. On a physiological level, this erosion affects your body as well. Chronic emotional stress, especially the kind that comes from unresolved relationship tension, can raise cortisol levels, disrupt sleep, and even impair immune function. What begins as a psychological wound becomes a physical burden. So, choosing to uphold your own dignity is not just an emotional choice, it is a biological act of self-preservation. In Eastern teachings, there is a recurring lesson: the harder you grip something, the more it escapes you. Water cannot be held in a clenched fist. Respect cannot be held in anxious attachment. It is only when you open your hand, when you release the need to be seen in a certain way, that others can truly see you. When you no longer require someone to validate your worth, you become someone worthy of respect. Not because you demanded it, but because you embodied it. There's a quiet magnetism in a woman who does not chase, a kind of strength that requires no explanation. She may still feel pain, she may still have questions, but she understands that her value is not determined by whether someone chooses to stay. It is determined by how she chooses to stand, even when someone walks away. This understanding leads into something deeper, something that is often hidden beneath the surface of romantic conflict: emotional safety. A man may distance himself, not because he doesn't care, but because he does not feel safe. Not in the relationship, and not necessarily because of you, but because of himself. Many people carry unresolved emotional wounds, traumas, and fears. When these are activated, the nervous system goes into defense mode. Withdrawal becomes a survival instinct. But here is the paradox. If you are not emotionally safe within yourself, if your own inner landscape is turbulent and reactive, you unknowingly amplify his need to retreat. When he feels confused and you respond with chaos, it confirms his fears. When he pulls away and you rush in with emotional volatility, it validates his instinct to seek distance. Emotional availability is not simply about being willing to talk or share feelings. It is about being safe to connect with, and safety begins with internal stability. If your emotions control you, if your anxiety leads every conversation, if your insecurities dominate your responses, you become emotionally unpredictable. And unpredictability, while exciting in the short term, is exhausting in the long run. People don't stay where they feel they must constantly defend or explain themselves. So how do you become emotionally safe? You begin by developing a relationship with yourself that is honest, kind, and rooted in self-awareness. You learn to sit with your feelings without projecting them. You recognize your triggers not as truths, but as teachers. You give space for discomfort without trying to solve it through someone else's behavior. From a neuroscience perspective, emotional safety is rooted in nervous system regulation. When your body feels threatened, whether through abandonment, rejection, or uncertainty, it reacts. Heart rate increases, muscles tense, the brain floods with stress hormones. But through practices such as breathwork, mindfulness, and inner reflection, you train your system to stay grounded. And when you are grounded, you become a refuge. You offer others not just love, but calm. Not just presence, but peace. There's a powerful example of this in a couple who had been together for years. The man, after facing pressure at work and unresolved grief from childhood, began to shut down emotionally. He became distant, quiet, withdrawn. The woman, instead of demanding answers or chasing after him, chose a different approach. She created emotional space. She didn't abandon the relationship, but she didn't force closeness either. She spoke softly when needed, but mostly she listened. And when she did speak, her words came not from fear, but from compassion. In time, he began to open up, not because she forced him, but because she offered something rare, the safety to be imperfect, to be seen, and to be accepted even in silence. This kind of emotional presence requires discipline. It is not passive. It is not about suppressing your needs. It is about holding them with care and choosing to express them from clarity rather than chaos. It's the difference between saying, "Why aren't you talking to me?" and "I notice you're quiet and I want to understand you better when you're ready." One approach demands, the other invites. One creates pressure, the other creates safety. It's important to realize that emotional maturity isn't measured by how much you give in a relationship. It's measured by how well you maintain your inner balance when your needs are not being met. It's seen in how you respond to distance, not with desperation, but with discernment. You stop asking, "How do I get him to come closer?" and start asking, "What is this silence teaching me about myself?" Because in every moment of emotional distance, there is a mirror. It shows you your own dependency, your own unhealed wounds, your own patterns of abandonment. And instead of fearing that space, you can choose to study it. You can choose to use it not as a verdict on your worth, but as an invitation to deeper awareness. When you become emotionally safe for yourself, when you can sit with your pain without escaping it, you automatically become safe for others. And in relationships, that is the foundation of everything. Emotional safety precedes emotional intimacy. Without it, connection becomes conditional. But with it, even silence becomes sacred. People will always be drawn to where they feel most at peace. And if that peace lives within you, your presence becomes irresistible, not because you try to hold on, but because you no longer fear letting go. In the end, every emotional withdrawal is not just about the other person's distance. It's about what you do with the space they leave behind. Do you fill it with noise, or do you let it become a sanctuary for truth? The more you practice this, the more you realize that distance is not always disconnection. Sometimes it is preparation. Preparation for a deeper connection, first with yourself and then with others. And this is where true transformation begins. What you do in the silence between you and another defines the shape of the relationship that follows. This is the moment where instinct wants to react. Speak too quickly. Type out messages you later wish you hadn't sent. Cry into the empty space as though filling it with your emotions might summon back clarity. But the truth is, the quality of your relationships is not determined during the easy moments when words flow and affection is given freely. It is shaped in the space between connections. When someone pulls away, when uncertainty enters, when you are left with questions and silence instead of answers and closeness. Reaction is what the body does automatically. It's the way the nervous system interprets a perceived threat. Someone ignores you, and suddenly, the body tenses, the heart beats faster, and your inner world becomes chaotic. Thoughts race to assign blame, to make sense of the sudden change. Was it something I said? Is he losing interest? Did I misunderstand his intentions? But in this reactive state, your clarity is clouded. You are no longer responding from presence. You're operating from fear. To understand how this process works, we must first look at the physiology behind it. When a relationship enters a moment of ambiguity, such as a man becoming emotionally unavailable or distant, your brain reads this as a potential danger. The amygdala, the brain's alarm center, activates, flooding your system with stress hormones. This is the same primal process that alerts us to physical threats, but in this case, the threat is emotional. You don't fight to survive, you fight to feel secure. Or you freeze, unsure what to say or do. Or you flee through silence, withdrawal, or distractions. But true power lies not in reacting, but in pausing, in breathing, in creating space between what happens and how you respond. This gap is where emotional mastery lives, and it's also where relationships transform, because the energy you bring to the silence determines what follows after it. There's a quiet story of a woman whose partner, after months of closeness, began to grow distant. His texts slowed, his tone changed, his presence diminished. She felt the ache of disconnection, and her first impulse was to reach out, to ask what was wrong, to demand understanding. But instead, she sat with herself. For 3 days, she said nothing. She turned inward, she journaled her feelings. Not to share them, but to understand them. She examined her own fears, the stories she was creating in her mind, the childhood memories that were triggered by being ignored. And after 3 days, she did reach out, but with a calm, clear message. I sensed that something's shifted between us. I'm here if you'd like to talk, but I also respect your space. There was no blame, no begging, no urgency, just presence. The man responded 2 days later, opening up about a personal crisis he hadn't known how to articulate. Because she chose to respond, not react, the conversation became a doorway to deeper trust rather than a battleground of miscommunication. Every moment of distance in a relationship is an invitation to choose between fear and self-respect. Your response can either escalate the chaos or anchor the clarity. And anchoring clarity requires practices that bring you into your body. The breath, for instance, is one of the simplest yet most profound tools. Deep, intentional breathing signals to the brain that you are safe, even in discomfort. It lowers cortisol, slows the heartbeat, and brings you back to the present moment, where wisdom resides, not the reactive past or imagined future. Your emotional response is not only a reflection of who you are now, it shapes how others see you. A person who maintains their inner stillness in the face of ambiguity communicates something powerful. I am not here to control you. I am here to connect with you, but not at the cost of losing myself. That energy becomes undeniable. It invites respect. It invites openness. Or, if the connection must end, it allows you to part ways without regret, knowing you honored yourself in the process. This is where breadth meets boundaries. When you respond rather than react, you show others that your self-worth is not tethered to their availability. You stop acting out of scarcity. The belief that if you don't fix the situation immediately, it will collapse, and start living from abundance. The understanding that your peace is not dependent on anyone else's behavior. Yet this understanding only deepens when you confront an even more subtle truth. Absence is not punishment. It is a mirror. It reflects back the stories we've internalized about love, worthiness, and abandonment. When a man distances himself, the silence he leaves behind can feel like an echo of every wound that came before. It's not just about him not calling, it's about the father who was emotionally unavailable, the friend who disappeared when you needed them most, the moments in childhood when you cried and no one came. This is where self-inquiry becomes essential. When the silence feels unbearable, ask yourself, what does this absence remind me of? What am I truly feeling? Loneliness, rejection, fear, or something deeper? The absence is not just about the other person. It is a gateway to your own healing, because the only way to change the external dynamic is to first understand the internal one. There's a teaching from Zen that says, form is emptiness, and emptiness is form. In other words, what seems like a void is not lacking. It is full of potential. The space someone leaves in your life is not empty. It is filled with everything you need to know about yourself, your patterns, your emotional blueprint, your triggers, your inner needs. But most people rush to fill the void instead of studying it. They reach out too soon, they explain too much, They ask for closure before they've even asked themselves the right questions. And in doing so, they miss the opportunity. Because when someone withdraws, the silence does not come to hurt you. It comes to teach you. It comes to show you what still needs to be healed, where you are still seeking externally what must be cultivated internally. One woman, reflecting on a relationship that ended without explanation, shared that it wasn't until months later, after she had stopped checking her phone every hour, stopped rehearsing the same conversations in her mind, that she realized something astonishing. The silence had not damaged her. It had purified her. It burned away all the parts of her that were clinging, needing, chasing. And in the ashes, something new emerged, a calm awareness that she no longer had to earn love. She only needed to be aligned with it. This is the alchemy of absence. If you allow it, it will transform you, but only if you do not resist it. Only if you stop interpreting it as a form of punishment and begin to see it as a mirror. The man may have walked away, but what remains is your opportunity to walk inward, to discover the places within you that still confuse connection with validation, love with attachment, attention with worth. Relationships are not just about how we come together. They are equally about how we endure distance. Because love that cannot withstand silence is not rooted in true connection. It is rooted in fear. And fear cannot sustain intimacy. Only truth can. And truth lives in the space you are most tempted to run from: the quiet, the unanswered message, the unresolved tension. The days when nothing is said, these are not blank spaces. They are sacred ones. They are your training ground for emotional maturity, spiritual growth, and self-possession. So when you find yourself in that space, when the man has gone quiet, when the warmth has faded, when the certainty you once felt is replaced by confusion, pause, listen. Not to him, but to yourself. Not to the voices of panic, but to the whisper of wisdom beneath them. You might discover that what you wanted from him, a message, a gesture, a word of reassurance, was only a placeholder for something far more important: your own permission to feel safe without needing anyone to make you feel whole. And from that space, if he returns, he will meet a different version of you. One who does not cling, but receives. One who does not react, but responds. One who does not fear absence because she has learned to befriend her own presence. And if he does not return, then the silence was never a loss. It was your path to truth. And truth, once embraced, is never empty. It is everything. When someone distances themselves from you, when their silence grows louder than their presence, it is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of a deeper relationship with yourself. What may appear as rejection is often redirection, an invitation to realign with your own emotional center, to reconnect with your inner stillness, and to honor the truth that your value does not decrease in someone's absence. You are not here to convince anyone to stay, nor to explain your worth to those who are unsure. You are here to embody the calm that remains when others are lost in confusion. You are here to hold space, not only for others to return if they choose, but more importantly, for yourself to rise, whole, unshaken, and full of quiet strength. The silence, the withdrawal, the space left behind, none of it defines you. Your response does. And when that response is guided by presence, emotional maturity, and inner awareness, what emerges is not just healing, but transformation. Respect begins within. Safety begins within. Stillness begins within. And love, true love, can only find you once you have fully found yourself.